get started. Okay, so this is Real Combat, Fantasy versus Real Fighting. I'm Daniel Dvorkin, I'm the moderator, and I think what we'll do is just go ahead on down the panel and have everybody introduce themselves. Jonathan, do you want to get started?
Sure. My name is Jonathan Brazy. I'm a retired Marine Colonel, infantry type, combat vet. I'm currently a full-time writer in Colorado Springs, just moved here a couple of months ago. I'm living here with my wife Kiwi and two 21-month-old twin girls. I'm primarily known for my military science fiction. I've got about 75 titles, I guess, the bulk of them being military science fiction. I'm a two-time Nebula nominee, one-time Dragon nominee, and a USA Today bestseller. And I write, besides my Marine Corps training and the martial arts I took at the Naval Academy, I also write, obviously, with a lot of combat.
Okay, Vanessa?
My name is Vanessa Robertson. I'm a Colorado author. The 3 books that I have out already are Victorian Paranormal, but I'm starting cross genre and writing some military sci-fi that's futuristic. I'm having a lot of fun with that, but it is my first one. The reason, I can show you what that looks like right here. There we go. That's the cover for that. I hope that popped up correctly. Did it? Can anybody tell me? It did not.
I don't know that we can share screen.
Oh, I was able to last time. Oh, there. Did that pop up now?
There you go.
Oh, hey.
There we go. So
that's gorgeous.
Nice title.
Thank you. The book I'm talking about right now is Starhawk's Aegis. So that's going to be kind of fun. Okay, am I back?
Yep.
I hope so. Okay. Let's see. The reason I think I qualify for this panel is I was a theatrical combatant, specializing in European martial arts, held a Society of American Fight Directors, SAFD certification, along with an instructor certification for about 9 years, which is mostly jousting, hand-to-hand combat, sword combat, improvised weapon combat, a lot of the other weapons you would see in the European martial arts, like axes and maces and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. Travis?
Hello, everyone. My name is Travis Heerman. I'm a Colorado-based author of the Ronin trilogy, The Hammer Falls, and an upcoming urban fantasy trilogy called Shinjuku Shadows. I'm also a martial artist. I've studied Kendo. Yeah, I was just counting them up in my head. There's like 6 at this point. Kendo, Iaido, Krav Maga, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Ninjutsu, I believe, rounds it all out. But so, dabbling in a lot of different things. So, and I use all of that knowledge heavily in my fiction. Plus I have a fascination with Japanese history and culture too. So that's where a lot of my writing words appear.
Okay. Mur.
My name is Mur Lafferty, and I'm the author of 6 Wakes, which is a space murder mystery that was nominated for the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Philip K. Dick Awards. I have written some urban fantasy. I've written the novelization of the movie Solo and a Minecraft book, which was middle grade. And suddenly I had to not worry about actual combat, but worry about combat within all the rules within the Minecraft game. So that was fun. Personally, I've studied Kung Fu and a little bit of Chin-Na and Tai Chi. And yeah, I'm working on another space murder mystery in a different genre, but lots of violence.
Yay for violence. That's why we're here.
Yay, violence.
So I'm Daniel Dvorkin. I'm a occasional military science fiction author trying to get back to writing. my background is some martial arts, some taekwondo, some kickboxing, fencing, SCA fighting. And also in the service, I started out as an infantryman in the Army, and then most of my time I was a medic in the Air Force. And so, as I was saying to some of the other panelists earlier, one of the things I'm kind of hoping to touch on here is the consequences of the violence and the the effects that it has on people after the fight is over. So we'll see if we get to that. In any case, I guess we'll just go ahead and get started with one of the first questions, which is, what are some fight scenes that you think are done particularly well? And that can be in books and movies, on TV, whatever medium. Anyone who wants to take a shot at that, please go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. I've got, rather than specific scenes, there's one writer who comes to mind who does it really well that I know of, and that's Joe R. Lansdale. As a martial artist himself, that comes through really well in any sort of fight scene. And plus he does the after, you're talking about the aftermath. He does the aftermath really well too. The physical and emotional after effects. And there are a number of movies I think that do it pretty well too. But we could talk, but I don't know. I feel like I want to talk more about writing because so I'm not going to go into those.
Okay.
I think, I'm sorry. Did you want to go?
No, go on.
Okay. I think when we talk about who does it really well, you need to look at two very different ways of looking at it. One is who does it really well, meaning from an entertainment standpoint, and who does it really well from a technical standpoint. Because your viewer, if you're looking at something, they usually want to see something fancy. They want blood and gore. They want action. They want something that is interesting to watch, or interesting to consume. But the readers who have, or the viewers, the consumers of the media who have actual experience, they want something that's technically correct, or they want something that's not going to make them that helps them continue that suspension of disbelief. I can't tell you how many times I will watch a sword fight and I will roll my eyes so many times I literally get carsick. For example, like all of the Witcher stuff, Henry Cavill is very physical, and so he uses his physicality very well. But the sword fights themselves, the way he uses the blade makes me crazy. The reverse grip that he uses, for example, the reverse grip that he uses on a blade that large, he is handcuffing himself, because you shouldn't use a blade that long this. Because he's using only the strong half of the blade and not the weak half of the blade, or he's throwing his body around so much that he's exposing himself to so much extra damage that he doesn't need. He's not using his fight space appropriately, but gosh, does it look good the way that he just rips people in half. So you're really talking about two very different questions when we talk about what fight scenes are beautiful. Also, the Kill Bill stuff looks great, and people talk about how cool and bloody and violent those scenes are, but they're horrifically unrealistic. So we really have to figure out, are we writing for an audience to consume and love it and love how bloody and gory and gross it is? When in reality, real fight scenes, good fight scenes, are short. Because they're exhausting. So that would be my 2 cents in it.
I think there's a difference too between writing and movies. As you just said, movies are visual. They need the fight scene to last a while for it to bring the reader in. Where in writing, you can be more realistic. And you can be more to the point. One person that in military science fiction that I like to read as far as the fight scenes is Marco Cluse. And I don't think, he was in the German army, but I'm not sure what his military occupational specialty was. But Marco Cluse is a good guy to read some of his books to get a feel of military combat, at least. And military combat is tremendously different from martial arts combat. You know, if you're getting in there, you know, with swords and hand weapons, that is a lot different from closing in trench warfare, for example. And the Marine Corps martial arts system is far more, I don't want to say street brawler, but it's far more, you know, you close in with anything you have and finish it. Whereas when you're doing competitive martial arts, for example, it's real, and but it's a little bit more stylized. It's a little bit more, it's cleaner, if I could say that.
I don't have a huge experience with actual combat or weapons training, but I will say that the thing that makes me cringe in mostly movies, because it's much more obvious in movies, is when your hero is surrounded by a bunch of people and looks like they're outnumbered, only they attack one at a time.
Yeah.
And so actually what the scene that came to mind that combats this very well is, like it or not, the throne room battle scene in The Last Jedi, where Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting together back to back and using each other. And yes, I know that none of that's realistic, but at least they were fighting people on both sides that were attacking all at the same time. Yeah. And I appreciated that, because you don't really see that a lot. One of the differences between movies and books is with movies, you have to fill the whole, you have to show the whole battlefield and how exciting it is. While in the book, you usually got like one tight point of view, and you can tell one person's specific experience during the fight, and you don't have to tell the entire battle if that's not what you need to do. Whereas if you focus in on one single person, it can seem a little unexciting based on what everybody else expects in movies.
Yeah. And really, of course, audience expectation is a huge problem. And reality, as TV Tropes puts it, reality is unrealistic. And so, I agree that there is a bit of a distinction there between what looks good or what reads well versus what's realistic. I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. I think you can write a fight scene, whether that's a one-on-one fight, whether that's a big battle or anything in between. Hey, sweetie. Excuse me, had to talk to the cat. That will draw the reader's attention or hold the audience's attention in a theater, but will still not set off too many alarm bells for people who know the subject. And of course, what that subject is, a medieval battlefield looks very different from a modern battlefield.
And one of the most accurate things that I might have seen, which it might sound odd, but it was in Indiana Jones, when he goes into the market, and the guy's up there with his sword, all ready. And what does he do? He pulls out his 45 and shoots him.
Right.
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah. And the story behind that is that Harrison Ford was very sick that day. He was supposed to do some kind of fancy whip trick to pull the sword out of the guy's hand, and he was just like, I'm not up to this. So he pulled out his prop revolver, and they looked at that and said, that's perfect.
Kudos to the other guy in the scene, actually, because he went with it perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. It takes talent to do that kind of improv. So I would just like to put in a plug for absolutely one of my favorite authors in general, and one of the things that I do love is the fight scenes. Daniel Keyes Moran, author of the Continuing Time series, which I think has never had the success it deserves. His fight scenes are great. He's a boxer and has also been in quite a few fights outside the ring, so he's writing from experience there. And this is street fighting rather than big battles. And one of the things that I really love about it, and this is something that very few authors capture accurately, is the amount of thinking that goes on during a fight. Because you do have to think. You have to think very quickly, but you do have to think. And he gives the characters just the right amount of inner dialogue. It's not just a straightforward description of, he threw a punch and then this other guy blocked it and so on. But it's just the right amount. And I think that's a really, really neat trick, and it's one that I hope to emulate in my own work.
Actually, can I bring up one thing? I remembered a fight scene that I really, really liked, and that was the fights of the Cavaliers and Gideon the Ninth, where the Cavaliers just start to challenge each other. And it's all from Gideon's point of view. And it doesn't really say block and attack and parry, but it's Gideon's opinion of the fight and how she handles it. And the first guy, she can tell immediately that she's going to, wipe the floor with him. And the second guy, she knows immediately that she's going to lose. And just that, her mental view of the fight, and both fights did not last long.
Yeah.
And I think, speaking of what you're saying about the thinking, that was a scene that did it really well.
Yeah, and it's a really neat trick, and I really admire authors who pull it off.
I think another one that does that, and it's successful. It's not perfect, but it's successful. Was how they did the Sherlock Holmes movies that had Robert Downey Jr. in them.
That was a really
where they would show the fight, they would slow it way down, and he would talk about very slowly what he was doing and blocking, and then they would speed it up to real time, and they would do the blocking on the fight real quick.
Right.
And that kind of shows the very fast mental acuity that has to happen in a fight.
Yeah.
And
it's also a great bit of characterization because it shows that Holmes has this extraordinary ability.
And very linear, very dispassionate way of approaching things. And I think another one that does that very successfully, and there are some fight people, some experts that have problems with the scene, and I could debunk their issues with the scene, but in the 1995 version of Rob Roy that has Liam Neeson and Tim Roth in it, their final fight, their final sword confrontation fight, is actually pretty well done the same way, because Tim Roth's character is fighting with a very different style of sword than Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson is using a basket-hilted broadsword that would have been very appropriate for his character. Tim Roth is using it looks like a rapier. It's not. It's actually a saw blade, which is why it looks a little off. It's in a rapier hilt, which wouldn't have been weird for the time period, but a lot of people have an issue with that, but doesn't matter. But you can see the very cocky way he's playing cat and mouse. And then the moment where it all falls apart for him. So that's another way that they show the thought process without necessarily saying it. So I think that was pretty successfully done. And it was a good fight. It has a couple of issues to it. Like there's an artifact where the blade actually goes up before the other blade comes, which is a choreography artifact. But
Roth was amazing in that movie, by the way.
I'm sorry?
I said Roth was amazing in that movie.
He was. Well, and he's also a classically trained fencer. So he really could fight circles around anybody that was in that movie. But and Liam Neeson is absolutely not. So it's the same past that's filmed from a lot of different angles, and then they pieced it together. But again, that's neither here nor there. So
yeah, you can always tell with actor on screen. You can almost always tell when the actors had actual fight training and when they haven't. And it's very impressive. There are very few who can pull it off without it, and I'm always surprised. I watch a scene and I think, oh, they're a boxer, they're a kickboxer, they're a fencer, whatever, and I go and look it up, and no, they just they just learned how to do it really well.
It's an extreme amount of body awareness.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Travis. Travis, your audio's not working.
Sorry. Can you hear me at all?
You're really scratchy. You're all cut up.
Okay. I have to do some troubleshooting on my end, but I wanted to give a shout out to the MERS Facebook, which takes sort of scenes in there that's so and
Travis, we don't have you at all.
Yeah. Well, Travis is working on his audio. I don't want to cut him off, but I just want to say there's in chat. A comment. I like Basil Rathbone, and who is of course a trained fencer. Absolutely, yeah. He was quite remarkable.
I never fenced, and I never worked with any swords, despite the fact that I have a big Marine Corps sword.
I was gonna say, don't they give you all swords for everything?
Well, I don't know if you can see it, but
There you go. Yep.
that's my Marine Corps sword. So I do know how to do sword drill, but I was writing one of my books called Gladiator. I was writing where there had to be sword fighting. And I found a website that said 10 mistakes authors make while writing about sword fighting. So I went down that list and I went, okay. And because of the cover actually had one of the mistakes, the character leaving her feet. And so I actually used that, and I had said she left her feet and she got really, her sword master really got on her case afterwards. But afterwards I got several reviews saying, wow, it's great that an author really knows sword fighting before he writes a book. And I know nothing. It was just this website which said, don't make these 10 mistakes. That was it.
Little bit of research. That's all you need.
Yep.
Or talk to an expert. Yeah.
Yeah, and that leads us well into the next couple of questions. One of which, so the question is, what are some really bad examples? And we could probably literally have an entire convention on bad fight scenes in books and movies. So let's not. Are there any particularly egregious ones that anyone would like to cite as an example of what not to do?
I don't have a specific one in mind, but what really gets me a lot of times is when people don't actually take physical injuries seriously. So it's like the injuries are just there to make the scene powerful, and then the next scene the person's fine. Concussions can knock you down, like not out, but down for months. You can be in bed for months if you have a concussion, not up and fighting in the next scene. And just basic injuries that really, especially with if they're implying that the medical tech is whatever the medical tech is and whatever history they're trying to mirror, that gash might kill you. And that's one of the things where I can see where people aren't going to find that sexy. Someone gets knocked out and then they're not there for the rest of the film. Someone's going, why? But it's like, you got to find a balance between making the injury actually hurt them and still keep them in the story on an interesting level.
But you can keep referring. You can say, man, my knee is still hurting from that.
Oh, sure.
Too many people forget about it. But my pet peeve in any, at least they don't do it so much in writing, but at least in TV or movies, is when particularly the bigger character, maybe who's the bad guy, whatever else, picks up the protagonist or one of their and throws them across the room where he bounces off a wall. First of all, why would you pick someone up and throw them, break their back or whatever? Secondly, you get thrown up against a wall like that. You just got thrown 30 feet. And now you're back in the fight with all your facilities.
Yeah.
That's my pet peeve.
Yeah, Daniel wanted to talk about injuries, so here we are. I love it. Yeah, no one really takes into account how awful and how sensitive the human body really truly is. And if you're writing something futuristic and you want to, be real clear about the armor or whatever you're doing protecting you, then you need to be really clear from the beginning what the armor can do to protect you and how it works to protect you. Like I'm writing military sci-fi right now, and I'm trying to make very clear from the beginning what the armor can do and what the limits of it are.
There are always limits.
Yep. So that once they hit a critical failure moment, or once they've hit the limits of that armor, it's very aware. They're very aware of what they've done. When we talk about injuries, especially to the face, the one that kills me is the bloody lip or the little cut above the eye. Man, those suckers. Well, jousting ones, I hit the inside of my helmet because I didn't have enough padding correctly. And I went face first, put 2 teeth through my bottom lip. I still have the scar from it. And when I took my helmet off, I had long hair at the time. I was supposed to shake out my hair and reveal that I was a girl. and the amount of blood pouring down my face instead of it's a girl that was, oh shit, she's dying, because blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. And even the guys on my team were like, oh God, is she okay? It was ridiculous. And it was a little thing, no stitches or anything, but I would rinse my mouth out and water, you know?
Yeah.
And it was days before I talked right, because I was all swollen and ridiculous. You can't be sexy when you've got a big old, you know, hanging out of your face. You get punched in the eye. That is not like this little, that is a big old shiner that just rips up your head. You get punched in the jaw, that rocks your whole world. I mean, writers need to be aware, no matter what genre you're writing, that you need to go watch some MMA or something before you start writing killer fight scenes, and you need to look up brutal MMA injuries.
I'd throw in there they need to go to a gym once.
Yes.
Try it.
Yes. Because if you have someone taking a knee to the face, you need to see what that looks like and write it.
Yeah. Also, of course,
Travis, I'm glad you're back, by the way. You sound so much better.
I have a completely different audio configuration now, so I had to go get my podcast microphone.
Okay, sounds very clear. So excellent.
Yeah, you were very staticky. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just going to say, with respect to the going to a gym, watching fights, etc. This is true. Of course, it's also important to remember that pro fighters really are a different breed. I had about 5 seconds where I thought I might be a professional kickboxer, and that lasted just about as long as I sparred with a couple of pros, not actual fights, just sparring sessions, and I realized that was not in my future, and
sorry.
it's okay. I mean, I did what I accomplished what I set out to. But point is, pro fighters in the ring get used to taking very specific kinds of injuries. They shrug them off and keep going. Most other people do not, including fairly tough people. I mean, you've been a Marine or a soldier. You've been through some tough training. You've been through combat. You're used to pushing on through pain and fear and exhaustion. That does not prepare you for getting punched or kicked in the face the way pros do it.
Right.
And certainly, I've never been hit with a live steel sword. I've never been shot. I've never been stabbed. I imagine that it prepares you for that even less, because nothing really can.
I got hit by a 17-year-old. I was playing rugby against the Army, and I was kind of embarrassing this kid. We were opposite positions, and he got so frustrated that with about 2 minutes left in the match, he came up and hit me in the jaw. I didn't know what was going on. I was on my hands and knees while everybody was tussling outside and everything got broken up. I've never been hit so hard in my life. I consider myself fairly fit. I'm national champion rugby player. I do a lot of sports and stuff. No, 17-year-old kid just knocked me senseless.
Well, a lot of martial training, a lot of military and martial training is inermant to pain, right? I mean, you get, Marines get used to life sucking, right? So, in every possible way, right? And I know martial artists have to get used to taking punches and kicks, and also, hardening your body to do the things like, kung fu and karate masters spend years hardening parts of their body, so that you can kick a steel post at full strength with your shin. It's insane. So so I don't know. I don't have anything other to add other than that. Like, training is sort of where you learn how to experience what this stuff's really like. And I would suggest to anybody who wants to write fight scenes, go take a couple. If you've never done it, go take a couple of martial arts classes. You can do it. Most dojos will let you do a week or two for free, just so you can sort of, I don't know, get a sense, something. So that's a recommendation.
And a good one. That is really good because it'll teach you things about your body you weren't even aware of.
That being
Even
said,
things like gymnastics will teach you something. Sorry,
that
Daniel.
being said, you also have to take safety into account. This is the medic speaking. You know, if you're older, if you're in any way disabled, you know, there are things that you have to think about in terms of how much of this can you realistically do. You know, I started taekwondo and fencing when I was in my teens, kickboxing and SCA fighting when I was in my 20s. I'm 51. I'm not doing that now. And even with that background, I wouldn't do it, certainly if I was starting cold. So, you know, this is where talking to experts comes in.
Yeah. Murray, you've been really quiet. Do you have anything?
Well, I forgot what the question was. We kind of been going around a lot.
Sorry, yeah. I think we actually started with what are some really bad scenes and what not
Right.
to do, and I think it kind of migrated from there. So
Well,
I've got one that I wanted to throw out there for the bad scenes. I loved the Christopher Lambert Highlander film. I hated the Highlander TV series because he held the sword wrong. Like in the very first episode,
Adrian Paul
was holding his katana with like this. I'm like, and I'd been doing kendo for a few years. I'm like, okay, done. I'm not watching this because nobody who ever holds a katana holds it like this.
He held it like a baseball bat.
Always like this, right? Like, okay, not watching this show.
right, there's a good example of a bad scene. Okay, Mer, were you about to? I think you were about to say something.
Well, one thing that Travis reminded me of that was very interesting is, on the other hand, you know, we talk about all the things that we claim the body can do that they really can't. Like, I remember seeing a superhero movie several years ago where the human heroine was basically just thrown up against a wall and all sorts of terrible things were happening. And then she just gets back up. It's like blunt force trauma does not exist. Inertia does not exist in the superhero world. You're just, as long as you're not pierced, you're fine, or hit with an energy, something or other. But what Travis reminded me of is my father trained in Iron Palm for a while. And he came down to Raleigh and was doing his martial arts teacher and my martial arts teacher were from the same, his taught mine. And so they were doing a big event together, and Dad was working with me, and we got into like a hold, and then they told everybody to stop and then started talking about the hold. And I'm like, Dad, that's not good, because he had my ankle and he did not realize that he was bruising me just by holding me. It wasn't being active. We were just like, you know, in our hold waiting to hear the next step. And he was hurting me because he was in the middle of Iron Palm training and didn't realize how hard he was gripping me. And, you know, studying that, like how martial arts trainers, serious ones, get like, you know, harden their bodies and handle that stuff is fascinating. Yeah, my Sifu once gave me a bruise that hurt for days but did not actually come out until about 2 days down the line. It's like the bruise didn't appear, and that I'm just like, how did you do that? And please never do
contusions.
It again.
Yeah, the contusions that start at the bone and kind of work their way out are ugly things.
Yeah.
Can I bring up something we haven't really talked about that a lot of people like to use, and I don't think they use it correctly?
Okay.
Adrenaline. A lot of authors and authors of any kind, screenplays, books, movies, whatever, they don't use adrenaline correctly. They use adrenaline as something that will focus you to get you through a fight, and adrenaline is actually usually your enemy when it comes to fights, because it charges you up and it kind of makes you shake. Now, some people can use it correctly when you are very used to the feeling, but a lot of times what it does is it gives you this tunnel vision feel, and it gets your heartbeat going really quickly. And when your heartbeat gets going and you get a cut, generally what happens is you bleed like crazy. And when you bleed like crazy, generally one of the things that you do, unless you've trained yourself to understand what your body is doing, is you look at the blood and you go, oh my God. and it sets your brain into a bit of a panic mode. And being tunnel visioned and panicked that you're bleeding puts you into a fear mode. You're not paying attention to the battle around you. You're not being aware. Your awareness goes down to nil. And you actually are in a much higher chance of being picked off. And as Mr. Brise, I'm sorry, I don't know what the H is going to be for, is saying from the audience, yeah, it's exhausting. You're going to burn yourself out faster than anything, and you go into adrenal fatigue. Adrenal fatigue is one of the things that causes PTSD. It causes complex PTSD. And over the years, we have dehumanized the condition because when it was first known, we called it shell shock.
Okay, I will address that in a second.
No, please. But
Okay.
shell
Okay.
shock, battle fatigue. You're done.
So there's this. I've got to answer that. So there's this persistent myth that shell shock, battle fatigue, and PTSD are all the same thing. They're not.
No, they're not.
Shell shock is a neurological condition. Understand, it took literally a century for us to figure this out, because of course shell shock was what was used to describe pretty much any kind of non-functionality in World War I. And then in World War II, they started using the phrases battle fatigue or combat fatigue. And sometime after Vietnam, people started talking about PTSD. And for years, including when I was in medic training, the assumption was that these were all different phrases for the same thing. Shell shock is a neurological condition caused by being close to explosions. And soldiers in World War I in the trenches were exposed to more continuous explosions than probably anyone else in history.
So they're calling it more like a concussive damage syndrome?
Yeah, it's this very complicated set of things that happens when an explosion goes off near you, and particularly more than one. It's kind of like a concussion for your whole nervous system.
So it's ECT. What football players are getting from multiple concussions,
right?
back
But
to back.
that's still mostly cerebral. This affects the
Okay.
spine. It affects the peripheral nervous system. They actually figured this out in Iraq because that was the first time that since World War I that you had a fair number of casualties who were exposed to explosions close by who lived, and so it's not the same thing. Battle fatigue, combat fatigue. There's probably elements of shell shock to it. There's simply fatigue. There's the sheer physical exhaustion. And PTSD, and also the other thing to remember is that PTSD is the P stands for post. There's also ASD, acute stress disorder. That's what happens to when you're in combat. PTSD is what happens afterwards. So it's not that you shouldn't talk about all of these things, kind of as part of a general syndrome, which is basically you send people off to war and you very often get something back that's not really the person you sent off. But they're not the same thing, and so that's one of the things that as a reader can really trip me up if I see people treating them as all the same thing. So
I apologize. That's something that I had not read. That's relatively new to me. And operational exhaustion is going to be in that continuum as well. Right?
Yeah, and again, part of that is the constant. I mean, what you said about adrenaline fatigue is very real because. It certainly, of course, it can help you out if you're trained, if you know how to focus it. But if it's happening to you all the time, day after day after day, at some point you're done. You have nothing left. And of course, physically and mentally, that's very destructive.
Right. So your heroes that are going through things repeatedly are eventually going to hit burnout.
Yeah.
So that's something a lot of authors I don't think take into account. Spinny shit makes me crazy. Let me just throw that in.
Oh, right.
Spinny shit. Slice, spin, expose my back, my vitals, my kidneys, everything that I need to survive. Have it.
Right.
Spinny shit. I hate it. Makes me crazy. I roll my eyes so often I get seasick. Spinny shit. They spinny shit on TV and in movies that I roll my eyes and my husband goes, don't. As a matter of fact, I owe the family a quarter every time I roll my eyes and say something when we're watching stuff. Spinny shit. Do we have anything else we get to talk about? Anything else on your list?
Well, okay. So does anybody? I just wanted to make sure. Does anybody else have any comments?
I do want to mention one thing. Again, it was fantasy battling with very large bats and rats, but there's a middle grade series by Suzanne Collins, who later hit it freaking huge with the Hunger Games, but this was her middle grade series before the Hunger Games, called Gregor the Overlander.
Oh, I love that
And you know, Collins put PTSD into Hunger Games as well. You know, her father had severe PTSD, and she has put it into her fiction, but she put it into Gregor the Overlander, which was middle grade, super violent, and it gives PTSD to kids. I mean, I still don't understand how she got away with all of this in middle grade, but it's very serious. And there's a scene, like a couple of books in, where Gregor, you know, it's portal fantasy. He goes into the fantasy world, he has his adventure, he comes back, and he's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he goes to after about 3 adventures, he looks at himself in the mirror with his shirt off, and he thinks, I can never go to a doctor again because my parents will be arrested for child abuse, because he's looking at all of his scars that he's gotten from his adventures. And he knows that someone who looks like him it's not going to go over real well in our world. And nobody ever talks about that. And I thought that was amazing. At the beginning of the second book, somebody got everybody who went through the battles of the first book, like, around to a big table. And in every other book, that would have been hey, let's talk about the glorious battle we had. But everybody just looks at each other and they're really uncomfortable, and half of them leave. And, you know, that was a real, like, oh, so that battle traumatized you, huh? And I just really appreciated how she handled everybody dealing with these serious issues that a lot of times in fiction we just shrug off.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And I had to go through therapy with the Wounded Warrior Battalion out at Camp Pendleton, and I wasn't hurt that bad, but a lot of these Marines and Navy corpsmen they were seriously injured. And in too many books that I read, you know, even if the person is hurt, you know, they love to get shot or whatever, you know, then the next day, the next chapter, there's no reference to what had just happened to their body. And I've put in what I try to do. I'm not trying to push my stuff right now, but
Go ahead.
I try to show what happens. I try to show the frustration of a gung-ho Marine who is now going through regeneration on his leg, and all his buddies are going out there and fighting, continue to fight. Then they're back in the rear with the gear. They're a pogue. The pogue is a word for people who aren't out in the front. That's a derogatory term within the military. And the frustration that they're 9 months back at the main base while their unit, their company is out there. And I have seen one of the most heartbreaking moments in my time was when I was first, I had to, like I said, it wasn't that bad for me, but I was sitting there at Balad Air Base ready to be medevac, and this Marine came up to me who they had put emergency, like a cage around his arm, because he had been with a group of Marines that a mortar landed and killed 4 of them and hurt him up pretty bad. And they're getting ready to ship him back to what was then Bethesda Naval Hospital. And he looked up at me because I was a colonel and begged me to pull strings so he can get back with his unit, because he didn't want to leave them alone. He had to go over there and support them. He says, you know, it's only one arm. I've got this arm. He had tears in his eyes, begging me, not that I could, but begging me to go back to his unit. And this whole mental process of a warrior who is now wounded, I think gets ignored too often in military science fiction, at least. They do a little bit better on military fiction, particularly some of the World War II books, but not so much in military science fiction. And that's a very important aspect, in my opinion, of what happens in combat.
Yeah.
That's really
We're
important.
really talking about 2 different realms here, right? I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about sort of the close-in individual martial arts stuff, but the military side is much more, is a whole different animal. It's communal in large part, whereas the martial arts side is very solo oriented, or maybe 1 or 2, right? But that's, you know, large scale combat with ranged weapons is a completely different set of physiological responses, mental responses than what you get in something close in.
Yeah.
So,
Also, the unit dynamics, like Jonathan was talking about, it's not only is the effect on the individual is different, but the way that they process it is different, because in the military, more than anything, you're trained not to think of yourself as an individual. Your whole purpose is to be part of the unit. And so you're always going to be thinking, if I get injured, if I can't fight anymore, what is the effect on the unit? And that is a huge, huge issue, I think, certainly should be something for the characters.
Yeah, that is something that I think gets ignored a lot, not only the mental aspect of it, but I think the physical aspect gets ignored too. And maybe this is just something that I see as a woman. I'd be interested to hear your opinion too, Mayor. I think that female warriors always have to be depicted as these sexy, beautiful, thin, leggy, barely wearing any armor, or if so, it's skin tight and sexy demigods of women that kick men's asses and run around. And I live on a farm. I'm 5'7", and I'm a $160, and that's not shameful to me. I will happily admit that, because my body's strong from lots of work and from jousting, from handling animals. But as far as like a BMI wise, that would put me at obese. But I'm not obese. I actually have a lot of muscle from working animals. And I'm solid. And most female warriors, most female soldiers, if you just look at the numbers, are also obese, because they are strong and they are solid. And they're also going to be scarred, and they're going to be battered, and they might not be what is traditionally stereotypically seen as sexy. Especially if they have had hands, arms, legs blown off, if they've been blown open in places, even if they've had some sort of advanced sci-fi healing done to them. These things can't be seamless. And so I think it's also important to look at the emotional side of that, because for men, things like that are often seen as badges of honor. If a guy's missing an eye and part of an arm, at least stereotypically, we see that as the mark of a hero. If not physically, the men emotionally might see themselves as, wow, I'm damaged. Wow, now I'm broken. Wow, now I'm this or that. And so we need to support them when they come home, and let them know they're still beautiful and loved and strong and very capable and very brave. But I think that we need to make sure that we also frame that side of the after effects of war and violence, not just the immediate after effects of, I just got shot in the shoulder and now I can't lift my arm, because not only does it hurt, but the structures that lift my arm physically are non-mission capable. They're not working. But Mira, what do you think about that for especially for women?
Well, this could get into a much longer debate that happens a lot at cons, I believe, but those characters are
Yes.
written not for reality, but for men's power fantasies.
Sure.
If they're going to have a woman in battle, she better look good and not as strong as me. And so I think
right, there's a fine line.
Yeah. And I'm replaying through Skyrim again, and I love the fact that there are several followers you can get that are women, and a lot of them are non-traditionally petite or dainty in mindset. And I think it's getting better. I think a lot more people are, if they're going to put women in combat, they're going to bring them out of combat and have them be scarred like the men are.
Yeah, and
also expectations though, and I know we're getting a little bit off track here, but in one of my books, the woman she's a big woman would not be considered attractive by today's standards, but very effective and does a lot of good. And in that trilogy, I have another character who is a little bit more smaller. I mean, she's a sniper, and so doesn't have to have the big strength and everything. And my readers, I loved the first woman. I mean, she was capable and she was a kick-ass person. My readers 100% gravitated to the sniper. So I think it's sometimes not just the writers, it's the expectations of the readers. Now, my sniper did not go into battle with a bikini bottom and
Right.
Good man, good man. That doesn't help her at all.
Right. No chainmail bikinis. I think we can all agree on that right now.
That causes the worst sunburn you have ever seen.
I completely
Oh my
believe you.
That is not a power fantasy when you are peeling. Let me tell you that right there. Oof.
Travis, were you about to? No. Okay.
Nope.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I think, for characterization, think about the different roles of the characters, and that's going to affect how they see fighting, how they see the consequences of fighting. If you're writing about a society where women routinely fight just as much as men, that's going to be very different from if you're writing about a society where that's very patriarchal, where women aren't supposed to fight, etc.
And you did remind me of something I was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that a lot of this is cultural.
Yeah.
A great deal of it. Joanna Russ wrote some really great feminist sci-fi back in the 70s, like her While Away stories, where there were no men, are really, and those women are depicted those women are depicted as having, some having violent tendencies. There are duels. Some of them are, they have filled what we would call masculine roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting. I mean, there are a number of historical examples of warrior women, and Japan has them, Africa has them. There were female gladiators. So a lot of what we're talking about with sort of is our current modern, like as Mur called it, male power fantasies, where women sort of fit into this model of what certain men envision combat to be, or envision sexuality to be. And so it's we could talk about this all weekend, I think.
Oh yeah, this is really this is at least one other panel, and maybe a whole con. Okay, so unless anybody else has anything they want to add to that, I'd like to try to get one more topic in. We're looking at about 8 minutes left here, so just one comment a while back in the chat on the audience about the chosen one with magical fighting powers. Superheroes are kind of a modern example of that, but it's also very, very common in fantasy. I think that is a trope that a lot of people are tired of. I certainly am. How do you, if you have a character, we've been talking about soldiers and martial artists here, if you have a character who is not trained, who is not experienced in combat, how do you bring them into that world? How do you put them through your plot without killing them and make the reader believe it? I guess is really what it boils down to.
I have a character that is actually new to the world of military, and he's there because he's smart and he's a tech, and he is kind of recently thrown into the mix. They basically gave him good armor, gave him the bare minimum of training. And in the very beginning, my main character, who is their CO, won't let him fight. She's like, I'm sorry, we know how we react under fire. You get to try to die next time. That's what she tells him. She corners him and says, you get to try to die next time. And she has all the people under her fighting in her unit, help him put on his armor, make sure it's put on correctly, drag him along, and he ends up being capable through different means. He ends up fighting smarter rather than harder. So he has different skills, and that's how I make him successful. is he's not a blunt force fighter, and she runs a team of blunt force fighters. And that frustrates her beyond reason because that's not what she's used to having in her team. So I made them approach the problem very differently. He's not a chosen one. He's just thrown into the mix in a different way. He's not my main character. He's my secondary. And so I think that that is a little bit helpful. And then she just makes him train like crazy every time that they're not in the middle of firefights. She makes him work very hard so that he's useful to her in a way that she knows how to work her men.
A lot of people who are not the chosen one, we're going to have a skill. My readers tend to like my female characters the best if they're talking about who my characters of all my books are. But maybe the favorite male character that a lot of my readers talk to me about was actually autistic. And that made him a very good sniper. I've had 2 characters who were snipers, and he was socially inept. I mean, I don't want to say inept, socially blocked off from the world, didn't know how to read other people's expressions and things like that. And his A gunner actually ended up taking a lot of that over with him. But he was actually, because of his autism, he was actually able to focus very well on being a sniper, and he was actually quite good at it. And so it's just kind of, he's just your basic everyday guy. He's definitely not the chosen one, but he was able to succeed in the battlefield for his book.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
I kind of hate chosen one lore anyway. I think that it, no offense if anyone here writes it, but I think that it has a tendency to be a little bit weak. I think that it was definitely the flavor of the day a couple decades ago, and I think that it's just not as interesting to a lot of people anymore, because I think that it's become very trite and tropey, and I think that people are just a little bit over it right now.
Yeah.
And so it's time to move on to something else.
Yeah. Murray, Travis?
I think one of the problems with Chosen One and super powered people like Superman is people give them too much power and then realize they can solve the problem really quickly if they use their power. So they're going to have to put something in between them, whether it's, oh, wait a minute, no, Superman, electricity, he's weak to that. Or it almost feels like sometimes people are, you make this like godlike chosen one character, and then instead of putting them through a plot, you have to put up walls for them to go through to get to the end, which would have been super easy.
Right.
So,
that doesn't feel like a plot.
No. Like the Great Machine and Babylon 5, again, we're not talking about people, but that's one of the things where they brought up something far too powerful and he didn't know what to do with it. So we never saw it again.
Yeah, which I think may also be another panel, power balancing your universe. That could be a really interesting panel. Yeah. Travis, did you have something?
I've been sitting here thinking about it and trying to, from my own fiction, I've been told that the female lead in my Ronin series is done very well in that. In the first book, she goes from star-crossed love interest to, by the third book, a sort of co-protagonist. And she does that through, in large part, martial training, because she uses martial training to claim her own personal power. Because she starts off as a teenage girl who's married off to a powerful lord. And over the course of 3 books, becomes sort of a woman warrior worthy of the title, and where she has to help defend her castle, her husband's castle, and so and I don't know how and like I said, I've been told I did that well, that I did that very well, but I don't know how. It was not a conscious thing. It just seemed like a realistic evolution of that character. Anyway,
yeah, you pulled it off at least once, right? So that's a good thing. Right? So okay, we are very close to out of time. So I guess I would like to ask: are there any closing statements?
I have one. If anyone has said something interesting, go look them up, go buy their books, go review them on Amazon. This is how independent authors and artists get paid. We have to do that if you want to see us again at panels. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next in-person con so that you can buy my books and I can sign them and I can shake your hand and we can have a lot of fun together.
I need my cons.
I need my
Yes.
cons too. It's very sad.
When my microphone died, I was trying to do a plug for Mer's 6 Wakes book, which has some really good fight scenes in it.
Thank you.
It has a lot of good books.
And plus, I listened to the audiobook. So and Mer's
audiobooks, if you want to
reader. So
just had Hell's Horizon came out, which is a dual commander book, and Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and The Mandalorian. He narrated all my chapters.
Cool.
Ooh, awesome.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to cut everybody off here, but we really are out of time. So thank you all very much. And thank you to the attendees for coming.
Awesome panel, guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
All right, time for farm chores. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Love watching your cat there, Vanessa.
She couldn't stay away. She was like, "Hi, I'm here." All right, bye, guys. Thank you.
Good day, everybody.